Heading into this offseason and free agency, I know a lot of people would have loved for Brian Gutekunst of the Green Bay Packers to get maybe a little bit more aggressive than what they did. Well, the Packers are getting more clarity heading into the NFL draft in regards to free agency, and that is that the Patriots have agreed to sign Stephon Diggs to a 3-year, $69 million deal. I know the Packers heading into this offseason were looking to get that number one wide receiver, number one caliber type wide receiver. Obviously, Gutekunst didn't like what he saw out there. DK Metcalf was rumored to go to the Packers. He ends up signing a 4-year, $132 million deal, a little bit too rich for what Green Bay Packers are really looking to do and accomplish in getting that number one caliber type wide receiver. Stephon Diggs ends up signing a 3-year, $69 million deal. He was also rumored, of course, everybody's talking about throwing out, hey, the Packers need a number one wide receiver, so why not Stephon Diggs? I'm personally grateful that they didn't get Stephon Diggs. Again, he signs a 3-year, $69 million deal. Another name was Deebo Samuel. And Deebo Samuel, the Commanders inherited his 3-year, $71.5 million deal. That's obviously going to get restructured and look a lot larger for the Commanders. The Packers obviously weren't wanting or willing to take on something like that. Cooper Kupp aging with injuries. He signs a 3-year, $45 million deal. And then you have Devontae Adams signing a 2-year, $44 million deal with the Rams. So obviously, Gutekunst really didn't like what he saw as far as the price tag everything was going to command. So the Packers get a little bit of clarity heading into the draft, and that is that they're going to get all of the guys, all the pieces. Obviously, their big moves are going to be happening, as always, in the draft, and it's not a bad thing. So Brian Gutekunst, I think he's pretty smart and wise with what he does with the money that they have out there. And I know that there's been some articles kind of knocking what the Packers didn't do out there in free agency. I kind of was one of them at first. I was super frustrated because I wanted names like Byron Murphy or even Kelly or Drew Dahlman. Guys like that is who I wanted, but the Packers weren't able to capitalize on that. But that's not a necessarily a bad thing because the Packers usually play it pretty tight to the hip, but they're pretty intelligent when it comes to what they do for the future. He's always looking 3 to 5 years down the road, not necessarily in the interim win now type mentality. Obviously, the Packers have a very good structured team, the youngest team in the league for the last couple of years, and yet they still are, talked about as maybe going to the Super Bowl over the last couple of years. But, injuries have kind of bogged that down. So there's no reason to believe otherwise that this young team that's going to only be playing together for yet another year is not going to get there again. It says right here in this article, the Bears, Lions, Vikings make key free agent signings, but the Packers move slowly. Okay, so what did the Bears do out there? Okay, so the Chicago Bears went and traded. So their offensive line was so bad. Okay. But they bolstered that under Ben Johnson as head coach. They traded for Joe Thuney, Jonah Jackson. They also added a center that I wanted in Green Bay under Drew Dahlman. Okay. So Drew Dahlman, they inherit that. Their offensive line immediately got better. And then they also traded for a defensive tackle in Grady Jarrett, a guy that's a little bit aging out there. So the Bears did pretty well this free agent market. And then you got the Detroit Lions adding DJ Reed, but they lose a corner. So it was kind of one of those give and take type situations. They were able to keep Barnes, their linebacker, and Ruzurike and Davenport, Marcus Davenport, their other defensive end. But here's the big thing for the Detroit Lions is that they lose Aaron Glenn, their defensive coordinator, Ben Johnson, their offensive coordinator, and other coordinators that go along with those guys that followed them to their new coaching gigs. And then you got the Minnesota Vikings who added some guard help, some good offensive line help in Will Fries and Ryan Kelly. Ryan Kelly was one of those guys. He's a veteran center that I thought would have been very affordable for Brian Gutekunst to go out and get. They don't. The Packers take a different approach. They wanted to put Jenkins at center, and then they sign Aaron Brooks to a $77 million contract, but that's not guaranteed. Okay, so it's similar to the Josh Jacobs signing where it's almost like, hey, you gotta play to earn the money. We're gonna keep you around if you're showcasing what you can do. Josh Jacobs certainly did that. Speaking of which, sorry about that. Josh Jacobs. Oh man, Josh Jacobs wanted the Packers to go and get that number one caliber type wide receiver. Sorry about that. And they didn't do it. Okay, so here's the thing: Brian Gutekunst certainly knows what he is doing. Now, we did get a wide receiver in Mikael Hardman. Hardman's not the name that us Packer fans were necessarily looking for in Green Bay. He is going to be a nice depth piece. So I do like the signing it to some degrees. And I think that the Packers, Brian Gutekunst, is looking to address the wide receiver position as well as the defensive end position in the draft, and he's probably looking to do it early on. Now, the reality is that Jair Alexander is certainly not going to be here in Green Bay, and they're either going to trade him or they're going to cut him post June 1st and then save $17.5 million. But the inevitable is happening. Jair Alexander is not going to be in Green Bay, which is kind of heartbreaking because that dude is such a lockdown cornerback, but in the same sense, not as heartbreaking because you need to win games within your division against Detroit. You need to win games in your division against Minnesota. And clearly, that just was not happening with Jair Alexander out on the field because he hasn't played against Detroit since 2020, which is absolutely, or 2022, which is inexcusable to me. If you got a weapon of that caliber, but he's unable to play against your divisional rivals, inexcusable. So the inevitable is happening. That marriage is going to get divorced in Green Bay between the Packers and Jair Alexander. So look for him to either get traded or, for the Packers to cut him. But the Packers, they can't just rely on Nate Hobbs out there as the Lone Ranger because Keyshawn Nixon just isn't a number one caliber type cornerback. He's a good fill-in guy if you need him to be that. He's not a number one caliber corner. I don't care what anybody else out there is saying. The Packers need to get that guy in the draft, and I think they're going to need to do it with addressing if they're able to get a guy that falls to them in the first round. If not, they're going to get him in the second round, early second round. Maybe they trade up. Maybe they do what they want to do. But leave your comments. Let me know your thoughts. But I think the Packers get some clarity heading into the draft, and that is they're going to wait on that wide receiver. They're going to wait on that corner. They're going to wait on that edge rusher, and they think they can do it via the draft. I think they're hoping that Lucas Van Ness finally pans out into that guy that they initially thought when they drafted him in the first round. Leave your comments, and as always, go Pack Go.